The hum of the fluorescent lights in the vending machine warehouse, night inventory, was a constant, low thrum against my eardrums, a dull counterpart to the ache behind my eyes. It was a sound I'd grown to associate with the metallic tang of stale coffee and the sticky sweetness of spilled soda that clung to the concrete floor. My breath plumed faintly in the chilled air, a visible testament to the late hour and the draft that always found its way through the loading bay doors. I moved between towering shelves of packaged snacks and shrink-wrapped drinks, my breath a shallow thing, each movement deliberate, wrote. My job was to count, to tick off boxes on a clipboard, ensuring the numbers matched the digital readouts on the handheld scanner. Rows and rows of bright artificial colors stared back at me. Crimson bags of chips, electric blue energy drinks, sunshine yellow candy bars. They were monuments to fleeting cravings, to momentary satisfactions I hadn't felt in what felt like years. My life had narrowed to this precise, unthinking rhythm, a stark contrast to the chaotic void my parents had left behind. It was a colleague, the night supervisor, a man whose face I rarely saw clearly, only the tired lines around his eyes. He approached with a heavy gait, a thick envelope held out in his gloved hand. "For you, Seth," he grunted, his voice rough with fatigue. "Came by courier. Had to sign for it." The envelope was thick, cream-colored, with a crisp, expensive feel under my gloved fingers. It bore no return address, only a stark, elegant crest pressed into the wax seal. My name was etched in a looping, old-fashioned script. Who would send me something like this? My circle was small, broken, and certainly not accustomed to such formal correspondence. A strange prickle of unease ran up my arms. I tore open the seal, the paper rasping, and pulled out a stack of documents. The first sheet was a letter typewritten, dated 2 weeks prior. The words tasted like dust on my tongue. I'd never heard of it or any estate. My family history was a blank slate beyond my parents, a lineage I'd never felt the need to explore. My pulse, usually a steady drum against my ribs, gave a sudden, hard throb. The air in the warehouse, usually smelling of cardboard and plastic, seemed to thicken, taking on an almost metallic scent like old iron. The letter continued, outlining a remote, decaying ancestral home, property I never knew existed, nestled deep in the forgotten countryside. It spoke of a distant relative, long estranged, recently deceased. It was a shock, a sudden, jarring chord in the quiet, mournful symphony of my life. A house, a whole house. Could this be a way out of the fluorescent-lit purgatory I'd built for myself? A chance to escape the silent, echoing rooms of my small apartment, rooms that felt too big, too empty without them? I folded the letter carefully, the expensive paper crinkling softly. The decision was not immediate, not easy. It felt like stepping onto a rickety bridge over a chasm, the other side obscured by mist. But the alternative was more counting, more stale coffee, more nights spent cataloging other people's fleeting desires. My grief, heavy as it was, had also made me reckless, hungry for anything that might break the suffocating monotony. This house, whatever it was, offered a disruption. It offered something different. I finished my shift, the numbers on the clipboard blurring. What kind of secrets could a forgotten house hold, left to rot in some distant wilderness? And why, after all these years, had it chosen to call for me? The words, Blackwood Hollow, had clung to me, a phantom taste of dust even after I'd clocked out of the vending machine warehouse. Night inventory. The fluorescent hum of the vast space, the metallic tang of packaged snacks, the rhythmic clack of the inventory scanner, all of it felt distant, a life already slipping away. I'd driven straight out of the city, the concrete canyons giving way to sprawling suburbs, then finally to open highway, the black ribbon stretching into the night. My old life, a dull, predictable drone, receded in the rearview mirror, replaced by an unsettling anticipation. The highway dissolved into narrower roads, then finally, a barely there track swallowed by dense, ancient woods. The air thickened, losing the city's exhaust and taking on the damp, earthy scent of pine and decay. My headlights, once cutting bright swaths, now seemed to struggle against the encroaching darkness, the trees forming an oppressive tunnel. My hands, usually relaxed on the wheel, gripped tighter, gripped tight. What was I driving into? Then the break in the trees. A rusted, ornate iron gate, half swallowed by ivy, stood ajar. Beyond it, a gravel drive, long and winding, disappeared into the gloom. The name felt less like dust now, more like a cold stone settling in my gut. The trees here were older, their branches gnarled like arthritic fingers, blocking out the sliver of moon that had begun to peek through the clouds. My pulse, a frantic drum against my ribs, sped up. I had no idea what waited for me at the end of this path. The drive felt endless, a journey through deepening twilight. Massive, imposing, the house. It loomed, a skeletal silhouette against the bruised twilight sky, its roofline jagged, its chimneys like broken teeth. It was far larger than the solicitor had described, a sprawling Victorian monstrosity that seemed to sag under the weight of its own history. Vines, thick as my arm, wrestled with the crumbling stone, pulling it further into ruin. Every window, black and empty, stared back like vacant eyes. I cut the engine. The air that touched my face carried the unmistakable scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and something else, something metallic and faint, like old blood or perhaps just rust from the ancient ironwork. I stepped out, the gravel sharp under my worn boots. As my fingers closed around the cold metal, a profound sense of isolation washed over me. Had anyone truly lived here for decades? The smell hit me first. A thick, musty odor of stagnation, dust, and something undeniably organic like forgotten flowers left to rot in a dark room. It coated my tongue, a bitter, cloying taste. My flashlight beam cut through the Inkai blackness, revealing a grand foyer, vast and cavernous. Dust motes danced in the light, thick as snow. They looked like ghosts, silently watching. Each step I took, each scuff of my boot on the bare, cold floorboards seemed to amplify, reverberating through the vast, empty space. Was I truly alone in here? I moved from room to room on the ground floor, my light sweeping across shrouded forms. A dining room, the long table, a silent, sheeted sentinel. The kitchen, its appliances ancient and caked in grime. The silence was the most oppressive thing, broken only by the creak of old wood, the sigh of the wind outside, or the sudden, sharp tick of something settling in the walls. I tried to dismiss it, the natural sounds of an old house. It was gone before I could focus on it, a wisp of sound like the house exhaling. My skin prickled, aware. Nothing. Was it just the wind playing tricks, or was something else here with me? The air felt heavy, like an invisible weight pressing down. The banister, when I gripped it, was rough with dust and splintered wood. The steps groaned under my weight, each one a complaint. More draped furniture lined the hallway, more empty, staring windows. I pushed open the door to what I assumed was the master bedroom. It was even larger than the rooms downstairs, with a massive four-poster bed draped in white. I walked to the window, pushing aside a heavy, dust-laden curtain. Below, the dense woods pressed in, a wall of black. As I turned from the window, a small porcelain figurine, a shepherdess, sitting on a bedside table, seemed to have shifted. It now faced me directly, its painted eyes wide and unblinking. I was certain it had been facing the wall before. Had I bumped it without realizing? I chose a small, less intimidating bedroom on the first floor, tearing the sheet from the bed to make a makeshift sleeping surface on the floor. The sheets themselves smelled of mildew and age, a faint, sweet decay. The sounds of the house began. Groans from the floorboards above, a persistent, rhythmic drip from somewhere downstairs, the wind whistling a mournful tune through a loose pane. I tried to focus on the soft glow of the candles, on the feeling of the rough blanket against my skin. But then a distinct scraping sound, like fingernails dragging across wood, came from directly beneath my feet. It stopped as soon as I froze, holding my breath. I strained my ears, waiting. Only the wind. But my heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm. How could I possibly sleep tonight, knowing what might be stirring in the depths of this house? The fluorescent hum of the vast space, the metallic tang of packaged snacks, the rhythmic clack of the inventory scanner, all of it felt distant. A life I was quickly outgrowing. My hands, still smelling faintly of cardboard and stale chips, gripped the steering wheel, gripped tight. The city lights receded in my rearview mirror, blurring into a yellow haze. I was driving towards something unknown, a destination whispered only in legal documents and a brief, clipped phone call with the solicitor. The highway gave way to narrower roads, then to a winding lane canopied by ancient gnarled trees. Their branches, skeletal against the bruised evening sky, seemed to claw at the passing car. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. My breath hitched. This was it. What kind of secrets did these woods hold? It was larger than I'd imagined, a sprawling Victorian behemoth, once grand, now in disrepair. Peeling paint, broken shutters, a sagging porch, every detail screamed neglect. A gust of wind, carrying the mournful sigh of the trees, rattled the passenger window. I cut the engine. The old metal gate, rusted and half off its hinges, groaned open with a protesting shriek as I pushed it. Was I truly ready for what lay beyond? The front door, solid oak scarred by time, resisted at first, then gave way with a deep, echoing groan that seemed to resonate through the very foundations of the house. A cloud of ancient dust, thick and suffocating, billowed out, carrying the smell of mildew, stale air, and something else, something metallic like old blood or rust. I stepped inside, my boots crunching on what felt like plaster debris and dried leaves. No power, of course. What was hidden beneath those shrouds? I moved cautiously, my footsteps loud on the warped floorboards, each creak. Each groan of the settling house made me flinch. A tall grandfather clock, its face obscured by grime, stood sentinel in the corner of what looked like a grand foyer. I could almost hear the phantom tick of its missing pendulum. Then I heard it, a faint scrape, somewhere above me. I froze. My hand tightened on the phone, the plastic warm and slick with sweat. It was probably just the house, I told myself, settling. Old houses make noises, but the scrape had been too distinct, too deliberate. Had I truly heard it? I ascended the grand, curving staircase, the wood groaning beneath my weight. Dust motes danced in the phone's narrow beam, a swirling galaxy of forgotten particles. I pushed open the first door I came to, revealing a bedroom. A four-poster bed, stripped bare, dominated the room. The wallpaper, a faded floral pattern, peeled in strips like sunburnt skin. A window, its glass opaque with dirt, offered no view, only a reflection of my own tense face. I swept the beam across the room. Something was wrong. A small porcelain doll, its painted eyes wide and unblinking, sat on the dusty nightstand. I hadn't noticed it before, my breath caught. I was certain it hadn't been there when I first illuminated the room. I stepped closer, my heart hammered against my ribs. The doll's tiny dress was soiled, its hair matted. It stared at me. My fingers twitched, a sudden urge to snatch it up, to throw it, but I didn't, or had something moved it. I backed away slowly, the image of the doll's vacant stare burned into my mind. My rational mind fought, scrambling for explanations. The solicitor had mentioned the previous owner, a reclusive relative, had been quite eccentric. Perhaps they had collected dolls, perhaps I was just tired. The journey, the shock of the inheritance, but my gut twisted. I felt a distinct pressure on the back of as if someone was watching. I spun around, sweeping the flashlight beam across the empty hallway. Nothing. It sounded like my name, Seth. Ice flooded my veins. I gripped the phone tighter, my grip tight. I must be hearing things. Stress, exhaustion. My mind was playing tricks on me. I needed to focus. I needed to find a room, any room, to rest. But as I turned to continue down the hallway, I saw it again. A fleeting movement at the far end, just beyond the reach of my phone's light. Too quick. It was gone before I could properly focus. My mouth went dry. My tongue felt like sandpaper. Was this house truly empty, or was I not alone? The words Blackwood Hollow had clung to me, a phantom taste of dust even after I'd clocked out of the vending machine warehouse night inventory. The fluorescent hum of the vast space, the metallic tang of packaged snacks, the rhythmic clack of the inventory scanner, all of it felt distant, a life I was already shedding. My palms still carried the faint, oily residue of processed food wrappers, a sticky film that made my skin prickle with an irrational revulsion. I scrubbed them raw in the staff washroom, the industrial soap failing to erase the lingering sensation or the chill that had settled deep in my bones. The asphalt peeled away from the faint glow of the city, becoming a narrow, unlit track. Trees, gnarled and ancient, leaned over the road, their branches clawing at the moonless sky. The air grew heavier, thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. My breath misted against the cold glass of the windshield, each exhale a fragile cloud in the encroaching darkness. I clenched the steering wheel, gripped tight, a strange anticipation tightening in my chest. It wasn't excitement, not exactly. More like a current pulling me towards something I couldn't name, couldn't see, but could feel in the marrow of my bones. What waited for me at the end of this road? The house loomed, a jagged silhouette against the bruised velvet of the night sky. No lights, of course, just the yawning blackness of its windows like vacant eyes watching my approach. The gravel crunched under my tires, a harsh, invasive sound in the profound quiet. I shivered, not just from the temperature, but from an invisible weight settling on my shoulders. As I stepped out, the floorboards of the porch groaned, a low, drawn-out sigh, though there was no wind to stir them. The air was thick, tasting faintly of mildew and something else, something metallic like old pennies, and something sweet, sickly like forgotten flowers. My skin prickled. Each step echoed, amplified, the sound swallowed quickly by the vastness of the space. I tried to convince myself it was just an old house, settling, breathing, but a knot of unease tightened in my stomach. What exactly was settling in this house? I tried to distract myself, making a pretense of tidying, shifting boxes, but my movements felt clumsy, my focus fragmented. It was localized, cutting through the general coolness of the room like a blade. I spun around, my heart racing, expecting to see a window open, a draft. Nothing. The window was shut tight, the heavy curtains still. Then a faint scratching sound, like fingernails dragging across wood, came from the pantry. My breath hitched. Was it just a mouse or something else? I stood frozen, listening. The scratching stopped, my pulse hammered. I forced myself to move, inching towards the pantry door. I pulled it open, empty. Just shelves coated in a fine layer of dust, cobwebs strung like forgotten lace. No signs of rodents, no disturbed items. Was I truly alone in this house? The feeling of being watched became constant, a persistent pressure on the back of my neck. I found myself turning abruptly, catching only empty air, but the sensation never faded. The subtle noises escalated. This place was actively pushing against me, trying to wear me down. I needed answers. The search results were sparse at first, old property records, some genealogical sites, then a local history forum. One post, dated decades ago, mentioned a series of unfortunate incidents involving previous occupants, each one growing increasingly withdrawn, isolated, before vanishing without a trace. Could these be more than just local legends? I remembered the box of old documents I'd found tucked away in the attic, brittle ledgers, faded letters, a few yellowed newspaper clippings. I had dismissed them as junk, but now a new urgency propelled me. I retrieved the box, the cardboard gritty under my touch. The air around it felt heavy, stagnant. A faint, cloying scent of dust and something else, something vaguely metallic, rose from the contents. I spread the papers across the coffee table, their edges crumbling as I handled them. The first few were mundane, property transfers, tax receipts. Then I found a small, leather-bound journal, its cover worn smooth, its pages filled with elegant, looping script. The date on the first entry was 1888. What secrets did these fragile pages hold? The journal belonged to a woman, an early resident, who meticulously detailed her daily life. Her entries started normal enough, then slowly, subtly changed. One entry dated June 12, 1891 stood out. He calls to me, Seth. I cannot fight him much longer. My own name there in the faded ink. The air in the room dropped several degrees. It wasn't words. It was a sound of pure ancient hunger. There was it calling to me too. The fluorescent hum of the vast space, the metallic tang of packaged snacks, the rhythmic clack of the inventory scanner, all of it felt distant, a dull echo against the sharper, colder memory of the house. I had tried to lose myself in the monotonous work, stacking boxes of chips, scanning barcodes, ensuring the correct count of bottled water. The warehouse manager, a stout man with tired eyes, had given me a perfunctory nod as I left, his gaze barely registering my presence. I preferred it that way, but the shield was thin. My skin still prickled, aware as if the warehouse air itself carried a faint, sweet smell of decay, a scent that had no place among the processed sugar and salt. Was it real, or was the house already twisting my perceptions, even from miles away? I drove home on autopilot, the night quiet save for the hum of my engine. It was a silhouette against the faint glow of the distant town, a gaping maw in the landscape. I needed answers. This vague, unsettling feeling wasn't enough. I couldn't just exist within its walls, waiting for whatever had shown itself to emerge fully. I needed to understand its history, its previous victims. What had happened to them? The internet was a labyrinth of dead ends. I needed something more specific, something local. The next morning I drove to the nearest town, a sleepy place with a single main street. The local library was small, smelling of old paper and dust motes dancing in the morning light. An older librarian, his spectacles perched on his nose, looked up from a newspaper as I approached the counter. He directed me to a small, neglected section in the back, tucked between forgotten fiction and gardening guides. "Local history," he mumbled, his voice raspy. "Not many folk bother with it these days." I found a few slim binders, yellowed newspaper clippings protected by brittle plastic sleeves. The first few articles were mundane property transfers, local council meetings from decades past. Then I found it. Her disappearance was ruled a likely suicide, though no body was ever found. The house, the article concluded, had stood empty for years after. Had she simply walked away, or had something in that house consumed her? I flipped through more clippings, my fingers trembling slightly. A successful businessman, his wife, and 2 young children. They had bought the house, hoping for a fresh start in the country. The articles chronicled a rapid decline. Financial ruin for the businessman, inexplicable illnesses plaguing the children, the wife growing withdrawn and melancholic. Then the father's accidental death, a fall down the main staircase. The remaining family fled, never to return. The house was sold cheap again, and again it stood empty. Each occupant, whether solitary or a family, started with hope, then slowly succumbed to an insidious madness, despair, disappearance, death. The more I read, the more the air in the library seemed to thicken, pressing in on me. I tasted metallic fear on my tongue. Could this really be just a coincidence, a string of bad luck? Back in the house, the old documents spread across the kitchen table. The stories felt heavier, more immediate. Exhaustion finally claimed me. I fell into bed, the weight of history pressing down. The dream came quickly. I was in the house, but it was subtly different. Grand, yet decaying, as if time had accelerated its rot. Then I saw them, faint, translucent figures like echoes moving through the house. The Miller children, pale and listless, their laughter replaced by soft whimpers. The businessman, his face contorted in despair, staring up the stairs as if something waited for him there. They were all there, trapped in a loop of their final moments, their suffering a banquet for some unseen observer. It drew closer, not physically but spiritually. I felt its touch not on my skin but deep within my mind, a tendril of ice reaching for my grief, for the raw wound of my family's absence. It wasn't just watching them, it was feeding on them, on their despair, on mine. I tried to scream but no sound came out. My pulse hammered against my ribs. The profound loneliness from the dream lingered, a heavy cloak draped over my spirit. It wasn't my loneliness, it was theirs. It was its. The entity wasn't just a presence in the house. It had found a way inside my head, inside my heart. How much of me had it already touched? I found myself at the vending machine warehouse, night inventory, the fluorescent tubes buzzing overhead, a constant, irritating hum. The air here was thick with the smell of ozone and stale cardboard, a sharp contrast to the damp earth and decay of the house. I had hoped the familiar, mundane rhythm of the night shift, the methodical counting and stacking of energy drink cases, would somehow anchor me, pull me back from the edge the article about Alina Vance had pushed me to. He had heard whispers. He had seen shadows. I had too. I focused on the inventory sheet in my hand, the neat columns of numbers, the satisfying click of my pen as I marked off another completed count. This was real. This was solid. Then a flicker. Not of the lights, but in the reflection of a vending machine screen directly in front of me. A ripple like water across the glass, though I hadn't touched it. I blinked. It was gone, just my own tired face staring back, eyes too wide, lines of stress etched deep. I tried to dismiss it, to tell myself it was just the strain, the lack of sleep. The warehouse air was always cool, but this felt different, intentional. I turned quickly, scanning the empty aisle behind me. Nothing, just the towering stacks of machines, the distant hum, and the low rumble of a forklift from another section of the warehouse. A faint, metallic tang, like old blood, suddenly filled my nostrils, overpowering the usual warehouse scent. Nausea twisted through me. I pressed a hand to my mouth, trying to steady myself. Was it just my imagination, or was the entity reaching for me even here, miles from the house? I forced myself to continue to count the cases of soda. My fingers, usually adept, fumbled. The numbers on the sheet blurred, then sharpened, then blurred again. For a moment, the bold print of Orange Crush seemed to twist, the letters elongating, stretching into something less legible, more monstrous. I squeezed my eyes shut, took a deep breath. When I opened them, the words were normal again. It sank into my marrow, so faint I almost convinced myself it was the hum of the machines, but it was distinct. My name. Seth, but stretched, drawn out like a sigh. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the metal and concrete. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice thin, reedy, swallowed by the vastness. My colleague stopped his work, looking over, a questioning frown on his face. "Everything all right, Seth?" he asked, his voice cutting through the phantom sound. "Yeah, fine," I lied, my voice cracking. He shrugged, returning to his task. Oblivious. The warehouse, once a place of dull, reassuring routine, now felt vast, menacing. I was trapped between them. A memory flashed, unbidden, uncalled for, my mother's face, pale and drawn, the way she looked at me just before. No, I pushed it away. Then a distortion. Her eyes in the memory, they weren't right, too wide, they weren't her eyes at all. My hands started to shake. This wasn't just my mind playing tricks. This was targeted. The entity knew. It knew my fears. It was using them. I stumbled, bumping into a stack of boxes. They rattled precariously. I reached out, steadying them, my palms slick with sweat. The metallic tang in the air intensified, burning the back of my throat. For a split second, my face wasn't there. A shiver raced up my back. The image vanished. Only my own terrified face stared back. Was I losing it? Was this the same path Alina Vance had walked? The warehouse walls seemed to press in, the rows of machines tilting, swaying. The hum grew louder, a grating, unbearable screech that seemed to vibrate in my very bones. I clamped my hands over my ears, squeezing my eyes shut. I couldn't tell what was real anymore. Was I still in the warehouse, or was I back in the house, trapped in some twisted, waking nightmare? I had hoped the familiar, mundane rhythm of stacking boxes, scanning barcodes, and wrestling with stubborn pallets would somehow cleanse me, scrub away the creeping rot that clung to my skin like a second shadow. For a few precious minutes, it almost worked. The cold, sterile reality of the warehouse was a shield, a temporary reprieve from the suffocating presence that had taken root in my home. My breath plumed in the cool air as I moved between towering aisles of chips and candy, the faint scent of synthetic sugar cloying. My hands, calloused from weeks of inventory, went through the motions, loading a fresh stack of soda cans into a machine. The metallic clang echoed, stark and empty in the vast space. I tried to focus, to let the monotonous task lull my mind into a state of blankness. Just work, just the job, awaiting. A shiver traced its way up my spine despite the exertion. The air, already heavy with ozone, took on a subtle, acrid tang like burnt sugar or something far worse. I told myself it was fatigue. The house had drained me, made me paranoid. This was just a warehouse, a safe, predictable place. It wasn't a sound I heard with my ears, not exactly. It was more like a thought that wasn't mine, unfolding in the quiet space just behind my eyes. Alone. The word, soft and insidious, felt like a caress, a knowing touch on a raw wound. My grip tightened on the soda can. My knuckles ached. I spun around, scanning the aisle. Only the looming, silent shapes of the vending machines stood sentinel, their glass eyes reflecting the buzzing lights in dull squares. No one, nothing, just the vast, echoing emptiness. I tried to shake it off, to convince myself that the isolation of the house had finally started to warp my mind. I forced myself to count the remaining cans, to check the expiry dates. It offered solace, not as a comfort, but as a lure. It promised an end to the gnawing emptiness, the relentless grief that had been my constant companion since everything. I can feel the quiet. Nausea twisted through me. It wasn't just a voice, it was a feeling, a pervasive sense of belonging that threatened to overwrite my own identity. It was the warmth of a hand, not physical, but felt deep in my chest, a phantom touch promising to mend the broken pieces of my life. Come home, let me in. The invitation was seductive, a balm to every ache I'd ever known. It played on my deepest desires, the ones I buried under layers of work and forced stoicism. My fingers fumbled for my phone in my pocket. I needed to call someone, anyone. A colleague, the detective who had briefly looked into the house's history, a distant relative I barely knew. My thumb hovered over the contact list. The screen glowed, a small island of light in the dim warehouse. As I reached for the name of the detective, the phone screen flickered once, then died. Black. Utterly, completely dead. I pressed the power button again and again. It wasn't just in the house anymore. It was here. With me. It had followed, or perhaps it had always been here, waiting for the right moment to make its move. The air in the warehouse grew heavy, thick with a scent I now recognized. The faint, sweet decay of old wood and something else, something ancient and hungry. My breath hitched. I felt watched, not by the machines, but by something far older, far more patient. I needed to move, to run, but my feet felt rooted to the concrete floor. The silence stretched, elastic, amplifying the frantic beat of my own heart. The invitation, the false comfort, had been a test, and I had failed. My hand, still clutching the dead phone, trembled. What did it want? The stale air in the vending machine warehouse, night inventory, tasted like old sugar and plastic, a thin film on my tongue that did little to soothe the lingering metallic fear. Fluorescent bulbs, high above, hummed with a tired, insistent drone, casting long, wavering shadows across the towering stacks of cardboard boxes. Each box held its own promise of fleeting satisfaction: chips, candy bars, sodas waiting for their turn to be loaded into the delivery trucks. My determination, a fragile shield I'd constructed since leaving the house, felt thin against the cold, industrial vastness. I needed this. I needed the mundane, the predictable rhythm of scanning barcodes and checking inventory sheets to anchor me. The phantom warmth in my chest persisted, a ghost limb of sensation where the entity had touched me. It wasn't physical, not in the way a hand pressed against my skin, but it was there, a deep, unsettling resonance that vibrated beneath my ribs. I tried to focus on the numbers, on the stark black print on white labels, but my eyes kept darting to the periphery. The warehouse was mostly empty at this hour, just me and the distant, rhythmic clank of a colleague operating a forklift in another section, a sound that offered little comfort. My skin pricked, aware. I felt watched. It seemed to coil around me specifically, raising goosebumps on my arms despite the thick flannel shirt I wore. I shivered, tightening my grip on the inventory scanner. The hum of the industrial refrigerators, usually a steady background thrum, seemed to stutter, then deepen, a low growl that vibrated through the concrete floor. Was it just the building settling? Old pipes, worn machinery? My mind, desperate for a rational explanation, clung to these possibilities like a lifeline. Come home, let me in. Then a soft scrape. It came from the aisle directly beside me, where pallets of snack cakes rose nearly to the ceiling. I froze, scanner held aloft. The sound wasn't loud, not like something falling, but like something dragging. Slowly, deliberately, my pulse hammered against my ribs. "Hello?" I called out, my voice thin, swallowed by the vastness. Only the stuttering hum of the refrigerators answered, now accompanied by a faint, high-pitched whine. No one else was supposed to be in this section. My colleague was still a good 100 yards away, his forklift's whirring engine a distant memory. I took a tentative step, peering around the corner of the towering stack of snack cakes. Nothing, just more boxes, endless rows of them stretching into the dimness. My breath hitched. The air grew heavier, thick with an unseen presence. The phantom warmth in my chest intensified, no longer comforting but suffocating, a smothering blanket of belonging that wasn't mine. "You can't escape." The thought wasn't voiced, but it bloomed in my mind, perfectly formed, not my own. Suddenly, a violent shudder ran through the entire aisle. Not an earthquake, not a structural shift. It was too localized, too deliberate. The stack of boxes directly in front of me, 5 pallets high, swayed precariously. Dust motes danced wildly in the weak light. I stared, paralyzed. The boxes, dozens of them, were shifting, not falling, but sliding outwards as if an invisible hand was pulling them from the middle. They didn't tumble, they unfurled, gracefully, impossibly. Then the top 2 pallets, heavy with their sugary cargo, simply lifted. They rose a foot, then 2, defying gravity before being slammed down with a deafening crash that echoed through the entire warehouse. Cardboard exploded, plastic wrappers flew. A cloud of fine dust billowed, obscuring my vision. The smell of stale cake, artificially sweet, choked me. My ears rang. Pain shot up my spine, but I barely registered it. Through the settling dust, a shape emerged. Not a person, not an animal. It was formless, yet undeniably there, filling the space where the boxes had been. It was the absolute antithesis of the phantom warmth in my chest, yet it was intrinsically linked. 2 sides of the same terrifying coin. This was it. This was the entity here now. It wasn't confined to the house. It had followed me. It was everywhere. My mind screamed, but no sound escaped my throat. I was cornered, trapped. What did it want from me now that it had proven it could reach me anywhere? "Hello?" I called out, my voice a thin, reedy thing swallowed by the cavernous vending machine warehouse, night inventory. The scanner still hummed in my hand, useless now, forgotten. My pulse hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against bone. The dragging sound had stopped. Silence pressed like cotton in my ears, thick and heavy. I edged forward, each step a conscious effort. The smell of stale sugar and cardboard, usually a comforting backdrop to my lonely shifts, now felt cloying, suffocating. The aisles stretched, narrow canyons between towering pallets of packaged snacks. My breath hitched in my throat. I told myself it was a rat, a loose pallet, anything but it. But the cold sinking into my marrow, the prickling awareness on my skin, screamed otherwise. I peered around the edge of the towering stack of honey buns. Nothing. Just the dim, yellow glow of the emergency lights reflecting off shrink wrap. A dry, rasping sound, like dead leaves skittering across cracked earth. It was a language I didn't know, yet understood. It spoke of hunger, of waiting. My vision blurred at the edges, the fluorescent bulbs flickering with impossible speed, casting the aisle in sickly green intervals. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp soil and something else, something metallic like old blood. My stomach twisted with nausea. I stumbled back, hitting a shelf of potato chips. From between the towering boxes of snack cakes, a form began to coalesce. It wasn't solid, not truly. It didn't have eyes, but I felt its gaze, a pressure behind my own. It didn't have a mouth, but the dry whisper intensified, a chorus of ancient voices rising within my skull. My knees buckled. I dropped the scanner. It clattered against the concrete, the plastic casing cracking. The entity reached for me, or perhaps it pulled me. I felt no physical touch, yet I was drawn forward, my feet scraping against the floor. Panic seized me. I thrashed, trying to break free, but my limbs moved as if through treacle. The warehouse lights flickered out completely, plunging the aisle into absolute blackness. Then the visions came, not like dreams, but like memories that weren't my own, forced into my mind. I saw the house not as it was now, but as it had been centuries ago. A small, crude structure built on land that felt wrong. I saw a family, pioneers, full of hope, then slowly, subtly, dissolving into despair. The mother, once vibrant, now moving through the house like a ghost, her laughter replaced by silent tears. The children, their bright spirits dimming, their games turning to solitary stares. It wasn't born of evil, not in the way humans understand it. It was born of the land, an ancient, forgotten thing that had always existed, dormant, until the first human grief touched its awareness. It fed on it. Loneliness, despair, regret. These weren't just emotions to it, they were sustenance. It didn't kill directly. I saw myself in these visions, not Seth, but a long line of Seths. A young woman heartbroken by a lost love wasting away in the master bedroom. An old man, his farm failing, staring blankly at the walls until he simply stopped breathing. A young artist, full of promise, whose talent withered into self-loathing, his final painting a canvas of pure black. Each one a slow, agonizing consumption. The entity didn't want a quick death, it wanted a slow, agonizing feast of the soul. It wanted the mind, twisted and broken, before it moved on to the body. It didn't want to possess, it wanted to replace. Their sorrow was its voice, their loneliness its breath, their despair its eyes. I felt their final moments, the crushing weight of utter hopelessness, the realization that they were not alone, but that their companion was a monster. My own grief, my own loneliness, my own despair over losing my family, it was all a beacon. I had walked right into its waiting maw, drawn by the promise of a fresh start, when all it saw was a fresh meal. The entity was not just in the house. It was the house, an extension of the cursed land, a living, breathing, feeding thing that had simply waited for the next vulnerable soul to claim. It had twisted my perceptions, blurred reality, preparing me, softening me for the final consumption. My mind raced, trying to find an escape, a way to fight this ancient, ingrained evil. But how do I fight something that feeds on my very essence? How do I escape a prison built of my own sorrow? The entity was here in the vending machine warehouse night inventory with me. It had followed, or perhaps it was everywhere, its tendrils reaching out, always searching. My body felt heavy, my thoughts sluggish. I could feel it trying to sink deeper, to take root, to finish what it had started in the house. Was there any part of me left that was truly mine?